On today's Locked On Jayhawks, disappointment once again.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and we are going through it right now. This was another tough one for KU, and we're going to try to talk through it a little bit on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to Everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're going to get into what happened. Kind of an unmitigated disaster. That has been what this season has become now for KU football, with certainly more talent and ability than the 1-4 record speaks. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into our goats of the game, what went wrong for KU, and what is next for the Jayhawks on this episode of the show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Maybe you need to get off the mat. Maybe you need to go bet on the Alabama-Georgia game and have some fun elsewhere. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So Kansas falls 38-27, actually their biggest loss of the season, and it comes in a home game with their backs against the wall to TCU. Obviously, the score probably a little bit closer than that in terms of how the game was played for a majority of it, which was just kind of back and forth, as opposed to TCU. You know, not all 11-point games are created the same. I think KU lost at Oklahoma a few years ago by like 10, and that one was never really a game for KU. So anyway, unmitigated disaster is kind of the term that I used at the beginning of this, and that is not just the case for this game, but really for the start of this season for KU. I mean, if you would have said coming into this game that Kansas was going to wind up being plus 2 in turnovers because of the interception at the end of the game, but for the majority of the game, plus 3 and nearly a plus 4, that would you have liked KU's chances? I certainly would have, in kind of a coin flip game. And again, kind of a rinse and repeat of a lot of things for KU. You have the bad end of the first half. Kansas up 17-14, can't hold on at the end of the first half. You give up a touchdown. That has been something that has been the case in all of these FPF games. An inability to adjust on defense in the fourth quarter, right? Or maybe it's just not making clutch plays in the fourth quarter. However you want to term that, that once again became the thing. You got that long touchdown to TCU, just unable to, I guess come up with that stop at the end. You go up the field goal that makes it the 2-score game, right? Like just unable to make those key stops in the game. Now, this was probably the best offense you played, but still, at least the best passing offense. Jalon Daniels having some inconsistencies. I thought the first drive looked good. I thought even the second drive was okay. I don't even know if he had any completions on the second drive, but he had like a run. I think that might have been called back with penalty. He had a couple balls that maybe weren't his fault. But still, overall, you have a 44% completion rate from Jalon Daniels with as many interceptions as you have touchdowns. Like, certainly wasn't vintage Jalon Daniels. You had poor play calling at times. Well, it was nice to see that there weren't all these like receiver screens. That was a positive. But I think some of the first down play calling, which we'll get into a little bit later here, remains to be desired. I don't know if certain things on key downs were more about the quarterback or more about the OC, whatever it is just not clicking right now. And I think even the play calling extends out to maybe the defense side of the ball. We talked about this coming in the preview. You could not just allow TCU to have open reign on these short passes. What do? DBs are playing 5-10 yards off, and they're giving up all these short passes or passes right at the sticks, and then TCU's making guys miss after the catch. This was kind of rinse and repeat. Feels like there's a play every game where, and this one may be more deservedly so than some other games, where Lance Leipold is just screaming, upset at the ref. There was the interview between the, I think, third and the fourth quarter where he was really unhappy, and I get it, and I think I think sometimes, and it was a big part of the game, it certainly was, but like you can focus too much as that if you're the head coach. I brought this up from the other end. Let's talk about this from the other end. There was a game in Allen Fieldhouse, I think this was 2 years ago, 1 year ago. There's one with Keontae George when he was still on Baylor. Baylor's up like 15 or something like that at halftime on KU. KU comes back, wins the game. It was Jalen Wilson's last year with KU. And I remember at halftime of that game, like they made note that Scott Drew was like complaining about the officiating when he was up 15. You're focusing on the wrong things. And so I understand you have to get after the refs. You have to play the refs. That's part of being the head coach. But there becomes a certain level. Like if you're the fan, you want to hang on to it, whatever. If you're the head coach, you got to focus. You got to get the sideline refocused. And they talked about the body language, during the broadcast in that The KU body language was not good. The TCU body language is good. That was according to the sideline reporter. I don't know for sure, but still that is something that I think has been kind of a carryover, poor timeout management, game management, whatever you want to call it. Improper usage or maybe just not enough usage of Devin Neal. Like there were certain drives where he just wasn't out there at all. And he is your best, at least offensive. I don't know. I think he's probably your best overall player. I don't know, just improper usage there, it felt like. The one thing that did change in this game that wasn't rinse and repeat from the last games was that turnover margin that we talked about. Like that's been something that's been killing KU, but they didn't take advantage this time, right? Like you get a field goal on the one turnover, you get stopped on the other turnover. And so it almost feels like you wish you could have applied this turnover margin for one of the previous 3 games because maybe that would have allowed you to win those games. In this game, it just didn't really matter either way. The end result, another loss. And maybe you could argue, I don't know, probably less arguing with this one as the other ones. Like TCU out-yarded you by like 150, 200 yards in this game. If not for those turnovers, TCU wins this game probably running away. So from that standpoint, this isn't one that I view in the same ilk as like the Illinois or the West Virginia or the UNLV games where it's like, you should have won that game. You were the better team. You could make an argument TCU was the better team today, and TCU did deserve to win that football game. Now, you could argue that if this play goes this way or if KU makes this play or, if this thing happens, maybe it's a different story late in that game, and that's fine and totally understandable, and I have no really, super sound argument that kind of goes against that. But point being, another loss that you easily could not have taken. I think that can't be argued, that like all of your losses now are games that easily could have gone the other way. What's crazy, you lowered your point per game average against one of the worst run defenses in the Big 12 and in the country. You would have thought this would have been a good matchup for KU. Not so fast, my friends. This was a must-win game. We talked about it coming in. This was a must-win game for KU. So what does that mean if you lose? Well, you're 1-4. If we're just talking about like pure hypotheticals, nothing's stopping you from winning out and going 8-4. So like the season's not over. You could still make a bowl game. Of course you could. But let's be real here. You're 1-4 for a reason. Are you going to go 5-2 over this back half of the schedule that features at Arizona State, which looks like a good team, that features at Kansas State, that features a good Iowa State team? Colorado actually looks pretty decent now. Baylor hung with BYU. That's going to be road. Like you look down the schedule for KU, you can argue that they'll probably still win a couple games because I think they're a good enough team to at least win a couple games. Like I don't think this is bad as one of those David Beatty teams that was going 1-11. I don't even think they're not as bad as the 2021 Kansas team with Lance Leipold that went 2-10. I mean, that team had no 1-score games outside of like the South Dakota game until the last like 3 or 4 games of the season. So it's still better than that. I think they'll still run into a couple more wins, but that could be all we're talking about here. And if you're talking about a team that had an 8.5 over-under win total coming into the year, that was preseason ranked coming into the year, and now we're adjusting the expectations saying, can they win 3 games? Can they win 4 games? That is a huge disappointment. And so the part where you lose a must-win game, to me, this was must-win for you getting back to being like a bowl possible team. You get to 2-3, you're sitting there going, okay, we can squeak out 4-3 the rest of the way, get back to another bowl game. Now, like I said, 5-2 the rest of the way with the way you've looked, and now maybe things start to get a little bit worse in terms of your mentality going into these games. Like that's kind of tough to get to. And so the importance now, like you still want to send the seniors out in a positive way in some way to finish the season. You want to have positive momentum swing going into the offseason. So it's not just you want to avoid the disaster being like 1-11, 2-10. That would be a huge disaster. At least 3-9, 4-8 is like a disaster in one way, but it's like, it's not a totally broken disaster that will go into next year being like, well, you had all these 1-score losses. Maybe you can be a bowl team next year. And really a big part of this, though, the rest of the way is just trying to figure what things are going to be for 2025. And so I asked this on Twitter. I asked, is this the most frustrating KU football season for fans since 2009? Because you go back and you think about even some of those years in 2015, right? Like so much more, I don't know, I guess less talent, so much, even though there have been all these questions about play calling and this and that, like the coaching was so much worse in the mid 2010s for KU than it is now, at the very least from like a program building level. But like, even though those teams were worse, at least your expectations coming into that year were, okay, maybe they can win 3 games. Maybe they can win 4 games. So it was almost expected. This was not expected at all. This was not expected at all. And so this becomes almost frustrating. I said since 2009 because you started so hot. You had a lot of guys back from, team that wins back-to-back bowl games, won the Orange Bowl a couple years ago, and then you just kind of fall off. But even then, I've had some people reach out and be like, no, this is worse for this reason or that reason, which, like, I don't know. Maybe this is the most frustrating season of KU football history. I don't know. I don't go back far enough to where I can say about, a certain season in the 70s, 80s, or 90s or something like that. But it certainly is up there and certainly in recent memory, and that is not a good place to be in for KU football. All right, let's get to our good goats, bad goats of the game. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com, and you can get in on the Chiefs, hopefully maybe a little happier times on Sundays. You can get in. A lot of people turn into basketball season. A lot of people are going to be saying it's basketball season now, late night in the fog coming in, I think, 20 days. You can bet on Kansas to win the national title, future on that, or Hunter Dickinson to win National Player of the Year, maybe AJ Storr. Maybe you're buying the Zeke Mayo hype. I don't even know if Zeke Mayo is on there. Last I checked, he wasn't, but maybe you can reach out to FanDuel and see if they can give you custom odds. You can do all that with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. On to our goats of the game. Let's start with the good. There was some good in this game, at the very least. The running backs, again. Daniel Hishaw, 13 carries, 85 yards, and a touchdown. He was really good for KU, able to hit some big power runs through the middle. Devin Neal, 14 carries, 70 yards, and a touchdown. That's 5 yards a carry. Total it up between the two guys, 27 carries, 155 yards, 2 touchdowns. That is great production from your top two backs. That's 5.7 yards per run between Hishaw and Neal. That's a very good place to be at. Meanwhile, the rest of KU plays, right? The rest of the plays that KU ran. So other players running the football, passing the football, went for an average of 4.6 yards per play. So what is more, the 5.7 or the 4.6? And you might say, oh, that's not that big of a difference. But that's also not counting for the plays that were 4.6, the plays that resulted in turnovers, which I think was just one, the plays that resulted in penalties, which realistically would drop that average down to probably below 4. So maybe you should have even given them the ball even more than 27 touches. Maybe it should have been like 35 to 40 between the two of them. Fans get a good goat here. I was very curious what the attendance was going to be coming into this game. I was worried that after the last couple of weeks, it was going to be 25,000, somewhere in that range. Fans showed out. The attendance they showed was 46,000. Now, do we know for sure, if some of those were people who had tickets and didn't show up, like how does that get registered? I don't really know. Or is that taken at the gate? I'm going to assume it is taken at the gate because I'll say this, some of the pictures that you might have seen like on Twitter before the game, I don't think did it justice. Some of those didn't look great, but also it's because the stadium's so big. Watching on TV or like when they showed sideline shots, it looked pretty full, at least in the lower bowl. The upper bowl didn't look like there was anybody like in the end zones or the corner of the end zones really in the upper bowl. But like, again, the lower bowl is pretty filled, 46,000. That's pretty good attendance for KU, right? Like, I mean, in the new stadium, that would be more than a sellout from what they're going to have in terms of attendance there. So good props to the KU fans. Now, is this going to carry over to the next home game? Yeah, that Arizona State, probably going to be a loss there. Bye week after that. I mean, I guess they could win at Arizona State, but, you're going to be underdogs. Bye week after that, and then playing a bad Houston team, not like a huge draw. What's the attendance going to be for that one? But props to the KU fans. I do think they showed out for this game, and, unfortunate of what happened. JB Brown gets a good go here. 7 tackles. He had a sack. I thought he was active, engaged. He did a lot of things for this defense. Obviously, no Cornell Wheeler with his injury, and so it was a lot of Brown and Berryhill, and I thought Brown stepped up in a real way, and they used him in some pass rush stuff, which I thought was cool too. Kobe Bryant gets a good go here. 10 tackles for Kobe. He had half a TFL. He had a pass breakup. He had that forced fumble on the first play of the game. He had some big hits in this one, stopping guys short of the sticks or getting that fumble, stuff like that. I didn't really notice him much in coverage, which honestly for a corner is probably a good thing to be at. It felt like to me, TCU, who did have a really big passing game, you struggled to defend the pass. Most of it was over the middle or it was targeting like Mello Dotson or one of the other corners. I thought Kobe actually had a good game for KU. Dylan Woodkey minus missed tackles, which ended up with him only having 1 tackle. I was honestly surprised it was only 1. I thought I saw him have a couple more, but it felt like he had some good pressures out there. I think the PFF grade is going to show up well. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on this one. It did feel like he missed maybe 2 or 3 tackles in this game, but I felt like There was one of them that led to a big play, I'm pretty sure, but the other ones led to him at least slowing them down, like getting a hand on him or something that allowed somebody else to make a tackle. I thought he was played a good game for you on the edge. Luke Grimm gets a good goat, 6 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown, continues to be the most trusted receiver, making tough catches. The toe-tapping grab for a touchdown was pretty impressive. Luke Grimm's had a really good season despite KU's passing offense really sputtering so far. I guess Tabor Allen. I say I guess not because it wasn't a good game for Tabor Allen. He hit those field goals, 41-yarder, which kept it as a one-score game in terms of you making it and giving up a touchdown and allowing it to be a one-score game. But I say I guess because I think, one, I would have preferred KU to go for that 4th down, and if you would have got it, you would have ended up getting a touchdown there. Then it's still a one-score game at the end. Now, I guess it didn't matter because you didn't score. But also, if we're having to highlight the kicker, no offense to kickers, but it'd be one thing if he made like a 50-yarder. If we're having to highlight the kicker for making a 41-yarder, I don't know that speaks well about how the game went. Our bad goats here, end of halves again. We talked about this earlier in the open. The end of the first half has been a disaster for KU. So far in their 4 FBS games, they have given up 31 points in the final 2 minutes of the first half. And in all 4 FBS games, they've had the ball in the final 2 minutes of the first half. Now, this game, they only had the ball in the final 2 minutes at the 12-second mark. But they had the ball before the 2-minute mark. Maybe if they could have, ran more clock off, or if they just could have scored a touchdown that would have given them a little bit more coverage there instead of getting the field goal, then things would have been a little bit different. I don't know. But now, if you add up the total that KU has lost these 4 games by, they've lost a combined 4 games by combined 24 points. They are minus 31 in the final 2 minutes of the first half. Doesn't take rocket scientists to add that math together and think that, hey, if we were just even in the final 2 minutes, maybe they'd be undefeated right now. Or at the very least, they'd probably be sitting at like 4-1. Okay, special teams gets a bad goat here. Felt like only a matter of time with the way this season was going for KU that special teams was going to, give up a big play, right? That's just the Kansas special right there. First of all, stop returning kicks. It feels like there was the one good return for Wilson, technically 2. The other was called back by holding, but it's like that happens so much on return kicks. You have the holding call. You start at the 10, 11-yard line. It feels like KU has been starting at the 15, 19, 20-yard line when they could have it at the 25. And for an offense that has been struggling, 5, 10 yards, could be the difference if you add those up a couple times over the course of a game. But then, you have the punt return, and probably could have been a block in the back on TCU, but still, you have 10 other guys out there. If that missed block in the back leads to, a 15-yard punt return, that's one thing. If that block in the back, which happens at the very point of attack, leads to a punt return touchdown, there were other breakdowns for KU in the lanes there, right? So that was a problem for KU there. Jalon Daniels gets a bad goat, mainly after the first drive. So I didn't think Jalon was the top problem for KU, but it certainly didn't help. And they continue to be a team that it felt like was relying on Jalon being their star player, when to me, it is Devin Neal and Daniel Hishaw. But overall, the stats, 15 of 34, so 44%. That's not great. 179 yards, still can't get to 200. That's not great. 1 touchdown, 1 interception. If we take out the first drive, he was 2 for 3 for 24 and a score on the first drive. That means after the first drive, he finished 13 of 31 for 155 yards and an interception. Just not good enough. And I don't know how much to put blame on the receivers. You had a couple drops in this one. How much to put blame on the offensive coordinator? How much to put on him? I don't know. But regardless of what you think, even if it wasn't a good game, right, for the passing attacker, Jalon. I will add, let's put this in bad goats here. Receivers not named Luke Grimm. So Luke Grimm had a good game. I'm sure it's been frustrating for guys like LJ Arnold and Quentin Skinner. You finished last season in the bowl game where you're throwing it around the yard with Jason Bean. You're getting huge totals. You're coming into this year thinking we're going to have huge seasons. And then Jalon Daniels dips off. The passing game dips off. You're not getting as many opportunities. Luke Grimm's getting a lot of the opportunities. It's probably frustrating for both those guys. I would surely imagine that is the case. But you know what's one thing you can't allow to happen? If you're frustrated, letting that creep into play. LJ Arnold has the one drop on I honestly don't remember what the down and distance was, but it was a little sideline throw, like a little hitch, just drops it right at the sticks. There was the one reviewed call that should have been a catch that ends up being a drop for him. Again, if you just hold on to the ball, then there is no question there. But yeah, I think that probably should have been a catch, but still. And then you have the Quentin Skinner one where, again, he's probably frustrated. He had that one throw from Jalon Daniels that was underthrown where he was kind of open on a little corner route or something like that. And that's probably frustrating. But what you can't allow to happen is the frustration to lead to a mistake later, which on the deep ball was a beautiful ball by Jalon Daniels. If he catches that thing, They're first and goal inside the 5-yard line, and what ends up happening there. So it's a little bit of everything here, and the play calling as well, I think, is part of this. As we said, for bad goats, I think for this time, it was probably with both coordinators. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. Again, we mentioned earlier, like Hishaw and Neal were your top guys, but you didn't go to them enough. The first down play calling was really interesting to me. So I'm not going to count the final 2 drives. The final 2 drives of the game, KU was down 11 points, and it's like, okay, you have to pass the football here. Like, of course, those are going to be passes up until those final 2 drives when it was obvious throwdowns. They had 26 first down plays by my count. 15 of them were designed running plays. Those went for 69 yards and a touchdown. So 4.6 yards per run, which 4.6 yards on first down, like that's going to set you up in a lot of second and third and manageables. I did not count the quarterback scramble to this, which would have added 6 more yards. I instead counted that to the 11 true passing plays that happened. One ended up being a quarterback scramble. It also did include some penalty yards, though. They had like a holding. There was also a defensive holding. They had an offensive pass interference. There's also a defensive pass interference. But you only had on the 11 true pass plays on first down, if you include for the penalty yardage for and against, 24 yards, a little over 2 yards per play. You tell me what was better, 4.6 yards per play when you ran on first down, or a little over 2 yards per play when you threw on first down. And so, again, part of that goes to Jalon Daniels. Part of that goes to the offense, to the play calling, to the shape. It's everything. And that is honestly what is most frustrating out of all of this. Like, what is KU doing well right now besides running the football with Neal and Hishaw? And even then, because you're struggling in the other areas, it's not as explosive as it could be because they're getting to load the box against you. And then you think about the throws short of the sticks. Again, is that the play calling? Are they setting up plays that are on 3rd and 8 when you have to have it at the end of the game? You're throwing a 2-yard drag route on 4th and whatever it was at the end of the game when you're throwing just or 4th and 9 and you're throwing it to the sideline for like a 5-yard pickup. Like, is that on Jalen? Is that on the offensive coordinator? I don't know where all this blame lies. It feels like it is just a little bit of everything. As far as the defensive side of the ball, I just don't get why they didn't adjust. It felt like TCU wanted to run that RPO, and they hit it over the middle so many times throughout the game, and KU didn't adjust, and KU continued to have DBs pressed off. I think Kobe and Mello are still going to be NFL corners, right? And I don't know. Do both get drafted? I don't know. Maybe not. But like, both are going to get a shot in the NFL. You would think that KU is trying to protect their corners the way that they are allergic to trying to play man coverage or try to play physical coverage or try to play press coverage at the line of scrimmage. At least give it a try in a game like this. I don't understand that. And then KU started to struggle to stop the run, which that was its whole other thing. You couldn't tackle in the second half. I guess that'd be a good goat too. Maybe that was KU just getting tired. Maybe that was hitting a quit wall. I don't know. It's too many I don't knows, which is not a good thing to have right now. The officiating gets a bad goat. Wasn't the reason you lost, but there were several key plays that certainly didn't help and certainly distanced you a little bit more and were key momentum plays, to say the least. And then the pass blocking. Jalon Daniels was under a little bit more pressure than you'd like. There's some shuffling going on at like the tackle positions right now. There were some holding calls at the tackle positions right now. The pass blocking, a bit of a struggle. So overall, just the pass offense for KU has been kind of a mess. All right, let's finish up. Outside of that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? We're going to finish up what's next for KU football. This episode is brought to you by Game Time, which has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. If you want to go to a road game, you want to go to Arizona State, or you want to go to a Chiefs road game, you can check that out with Game Time. And maybe you've never been to the stadium you're going to be going to before. You can see the seat views right from the app so you know what you're getting into, even if you've never been there. I'll say this. There used to be a time in KU football where a lot of fans would just go to the game for the experience, to tailgate, just get to be outside, drink a few sodas, and have a good time watching football. I think you'll probably see that crowd go into the next home game with the Houston game. And I'll say this. You can probably use Game Time, and you'll probably be able to find some cheap tickets that are going to be dope seats in an NFL stadium. So you can use Game Time for that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Finishing things up, what's next for KU? We'll make this quick. I had a couple comments reaching out to me being like, hey, we don't need to spend more time on Locked On Jayhawks outside of some weekend shows talking KU football. I know some people are still diehards and you're still going to want to hear it. we'll think about what we want to do. But we are getting close to KU basketball season, so we will see what the content forces out here. But at Arizona State will be this upcoming Saturday. It is a Saturday night game for KU. Arizona State's looked pretty good, so that has to be a little bit scary for KU. And then after that, you have the bye week, which at this point, much needed bye week for KU. Then after that, you're back at home against Houston, which honestly, the loser of that game is going to be sitting there going, yeah, we're the worst team in the Big 12. And after where Kansas, I mean, we were talking about in the offseason, does Kansas have a shot to win the Big 12? And now we're going to be talking in a couple weeks, unless you win at Arizona State, which you're not going to be favored to do, is Kansas the worst team in the Big 12? And if you lose that Houston game, that is certainly going to be, not just a discussion, like it's going to kind of be fact at that point in time. Still time to turn the season around, and I hope they do it, but based on what we've seen so far, I don't know what the confidence level would be that that's going to be the case. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back early in the week. Bigger takeaways from this game, lots of KU basketball content, and plenty more to come with Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us.